Hey everyone, welcome to Ride the Stream. I am Travis, entertainment fiction writer, and I am accompanied as always by Michelle. Michelle, how are you?
I'm doing very well. I'm a independent pop culture writer on lots of different subjects. Currently, my big focus is on the Mummy franchise, working on a collection of essays that'll come out in hopefully early 2026. So,
Awesome.
yeah, I'm glad to be here again, discussing our favorite Lost program. So,
Yeah, we're here with episode 5. And as always, if you are watching, thank you for watching. And if you happen to leave comments, do your best to not leave too many spoiler comments, as Michelle is new to the series. Um, and with that, there's a lot to unwrap with this episode. What do you think? Should we just get started?
I think so. I agree. There's a lot to unpack with this episode. So I'm ready.
All all right, let me dive into my pre-recorded synopsis. Uh, Lost episode 5, season 1, called White Rabbit. The episode begins looking down at a bloodied boy's face, lying on his back with a thumping sound heard in the background over and over again. As someone tells the boy to stay down, we soon learn that the boy is Jack, as his friend is getting pummeled against the fence. Despite the warning to stay down, Jack rises up to his feet only to have another bully punch him again. This relentless spirit about Jack wanting to help his friend and other people on the island has been a constant through the first 4 episodes of Lost. Now, Charlie brings him from a daydream on the beach as he shouts for help as a woman is screaming for help very far out in the water. Jack doesn't hesitate to run to the water, swim out a great distance, and search for the woman. After attempting to dive down once or twice, he doesn't find the woman, but finds Boone, who had gone out himself to save the woman before almost drowning. As he begins taking Boone back, he asks if Jack saved her, and the horrifying realization hits Jack as the woman can be seen in the distance flailing her arms into the air. As she screams, and with Boone unable to stay afloat, he has to make the decision to go back to shore to save Boone. Exhausted, he doesn't stop for a moment before going back out into the water to try and save the person he went searching for all along. This opening sequence and the remainder of the episode present the show's character with the certainty that there are major consequences associated with their second chance of life after surviving the plane crash. Claire collapses on the beach. Someone steals the limited water remaining. Boone blames Jack for not leaving him behind to save the woman. Sawyer is a crass son of a bitch. And Jack is seeing visions of a man in a dark suit and white sneakers, which leads him to do nothing else than to chase this person down. The man in the suit happens to be his father, who Jack was bringing back his dead body on the plane. So the frenzied pursuit, taking Jack all over the island, almost leads to him falling off a cliff and dying himself. Jack is rescued by Locke, and despite Jack's efforts to go back to camp with him, John encourages him to find what he's looking for because a leader needs to know where he's going before he can lead other people. Jack ultimately finds part of the wreckage in and around a cave, which includes his father's empty casket and a new water source. He makes his way back to camp, tells them about his newfound water and how everyone needs to work together or they're all going to die alone. And that opening sequence is incredible, but let's just your first impressions watching this episode. Uh, can you take me through that for me? That because it's this episode, I forgot about this episode.
Oh yeah, um, I got to episode 21 of the first season, and then in preparation, I've been rewatching. But like you, I kind of forgot about this because it's sort of it's almost kind of a quiet episode. And it's not really in your face like some of the other activities that the group has been involved with, like the big hike and lots of visuals. This was more of a personal journey, so that's often quiet. Um, so I was really quite taken aback to see how critical Jack's father was through different ages, particularly to be that young boy and to want to stand up for his friend or for someone else. He says the other boy's name, but he doesn't just say my friend Mark. He says, well, that was Mark, whatever the last name was. So I'm not even sure that Jack, as that little boy, really knew him well or anything like that. And I'm going to make the assumption that he probably didn't know him very well at all. But he felt the he had a consciousness about wanting to save or to divert some of the attention away from the other boy that was being pummeled. And of course, the conversation that he has with his father in the next flashback
Yeah.
is that, oh, wow, so powerful because his father's telling him that, well, I had a boy that was on my table and he died. And, due to a heart condition. And I washed my hands. I came home. I watched some Carol Burnett. I ate my dinner. I got my drink. And now I have to look at you, Jack. And he's got a real blackened eye. Even his eye kind of looks up. I have to applaud the little boy that played the part, getting his
Yeah.
eye and stuff like that. Um, and he's got a cut over his eyebrow. And, you know, was it his finest hour? Maybe not, but he did what he felt was right. And his father didn't see that. His father tells him that some have it, what it takes, and others do not, and they shouldn't even try. So basically, his father tells him, you don't have what it takes. So don't even bother. Don't bother being
Brutal.
a hero. And I'm just like, oh my God, how did Jack ever turn out to be a doctor and for all of his foibles to still be able to be a functioning human being? To have that kind of messaging at such a young age, I was just shocked by how brutal his father was. And, just at different points, because then later there's another flashback when he's talking to his mother, and his mom's like, you have to go find him. He's been gone for 2 months and stuff like that. And Jack is like, oh, I don't know that he'd even talk to me and anything like that. And then he ends up going to try to find him. Um, Talk about some dysfunction there. Um,
Big time.
yeah. And so for all that going on, you know, that he's really dealing with a kind of personal demon. And the fact that we then find out that he was trying to get back to LA with the body for the funeral, and it was rush. It's like all the timing had to align perfectly to get his father's body to the funeral that was happening like the next day.
Yeah.
All this tension, all this stress, um, that occurs for Jack, and it is just they're they're on day six, just day six now. And, Jack is kind of breaking down emotionally,
Running on
and
fumes.
he's
Yeah.
yeah, and he's not having the same care. He's having to make very, very hard decisions, like you were saying in your synopsis about, Boone having gone out to try to save the woman. He couldn't do it, even though he had been a lifeguard. I think he'd been a lifeguard. I think that's what we
Yep.
find out in one. Um, but he manages to get Boone, but he can't get to the woman in time. And he even says later, he reveals that I made the choice to not not go for her. Even though he could have left Boone, Boone might have been okay, and Boone even insists that he would have been okay later. And really kind of rips Jack a new one too. Like,
Yeah.
why didn't you go get her? I could have made it, and I don't know if some of that was Boone's bravado, and maybe even try to take some of the own guilt that he was feeling. But it very powerful episode, and just rewatching it again, I definitely picked out even more things. But again, damn, those writers, they really get you, and they
Yeah.
really bring it together. And for this one to be kind of a soft pedal as far as tone and action, um, just like we've talked in previous episodes, how humor can kind of help give us a pause. This one gives us a pause too, but for a different reason. And I have to commend them for that.
Yeah, that opening sequence, I agree. For the most part, this is a like tamer episode. But they kind of counterbalance it with these like the opening sequence when he has Boone and he asks if he got her.
Mhm.
And he looks back over his shoulder, still trying to hold Boone up, and he sees her flailing her arms, and then we start to hear her scream. Every time I've seen it, and I forget about this episode, it's kind of terrifying. That reality of like, there's no right decision right now. Like, there isn't a good one. Like, he's gonna have to leave someone behind. And I know he puts that blame on himself. And the we talked about Locke not hesitating in last week's episode when he discovered he could walk again and just bolts into action when Jack calls for him. He brings Boone to shore and he goes back right out, only stopping because Kate is asking what he's doing. And he's just like, there's still someone else out there.
Yeah.
Um, and seeing that, knowing how exhausted he had to have been, um, it's such a different perspective, I guess, from the viewing standpoint for me, because I know they survived a plane crash and that's an awful thing. This one, I don't know, it felt because of the, the drowning, because the woman does die. It just seemed a lot realer. Um, and maybe it's because that's an everyday occurrence and then having to face that. I'm not sure. And then the sequence with Boone, like he's enraged with Jack and kind of Jack's hallucinations kind of save him from having to deal with that because he goes
Yeah.
off chasing in the distance. And then the scene when before that, where he sees the man in the suit with the white sneakers just standing in the water and he asks if Kate saw it, and she just has a look on her face like, dude, when's the last time you slept?
Yeah.
He won't deal with it. He just continues pushing forward, doing tasks, um, and I think Boone's outrage towards him kind of pushes him over the limit to be like, okay, I'm gonna focus on this uh chasing this man into the jungle because I can't deal with anything else right now. I can't make decisions. I can't listen to you scream at me. I can't deal with making a decision of leaving her in the water and taking Boone in. And he just goes off and to find that it's his dad that he's chasing. And talk about one of the worst character introductions ever. Like every time I see that conversation with him talking to Jack as a boy, oh, it's gutting. It really, really is. And you're right. I don't know how he manages to steer away from that and become a different person, or seemingly like he's, got things fairly put together.
Yeah. Yeah. I had not remembered that in through my first watch through. There's also another scene that I had forgotten about as well in there, and that I think it was probably my favorite scene, and that's the exchange between Jack and Locke. When Locke saves Jack from the cliff, and then later they're talking, and you want Jack to be able to kind of spill his guts, to somebody, if not Kate, somebody that he can kind of unload some of the burden that he's feeling. And who better than Mr. John Locke, the
Yeah.
philosopher, the philosopher namesake, I guess. And for Locke to be able to redirect Jack's focus so well on what he does best, being a doctor.
Yeah.
Okay, Locke says, well, if I came to you with all of these symptoms, what would you say? What would be your prognosis? And Jack, just like that, says, well, sleep deprivation, dehydration, post-traumatic stress can all lead to hallucinations.
Yep.
And so Locke is like, well, basically, there you go. There's your answer. Now you know what's wrong with you. You know that this person is, a figment of your imagination. But what then goes on from there is the fact Locke says, what if he isn't? What if he isn't a fragment of your imagination? What if he's really
Yeah.
there and you need to actually come to terms with something? And I thought that was just great. And, Locke goes on to say that he's a real meat and potatoes type of guy. He's really kind of a real world guy, which is kind of funny because in a prior scene, I think it was Claire and Charlie laughing about who is this guy Locke that would bring
Old geezer,
400
I think is
knives,
the
knives on a plane. So is Locke really just an average Joe? No. But, he does say, I don't believe in magic. However, he says, I do believe there's something about the island that is different. And, he thinks that the island's special, but he doesn't go to the point of saying, hey, I'm able to walk because of this island.
yeah.
He doesn't go that far, which is kind of interesting. He knows the limit, I think, of what he needs to comfort Jack and get him back on his feet so that he's leading. Because I don't know that Locke is not really a leader. He wants to do his thing and he wants to do his walkabout. He's a loner, though, so he's not the leader, but he knows that Jack needs to be the leader. So, he does try to get Jack to really think outside the box. And what is interesting is Locke then says, I have looked into the eye of the island and it is beautiful. And I was like, whoa, that's not what I was expecting, especially since in the prior episode, we know he came face to face with whatever this big thing is that's going
Yeah, the
around
big monster. Yeah.
yeah. And I'm just
Such
like,
an odd way to describe it too.
yes. And I was really like, wow, I had totally forgotten about that scene, but I think it's really poignant for not just the episode, but I think for the larger things that are unknown about the island. And, again, we get a couple of things, those little breadcrumbs that we get that help us to understand a little bit better, but then also leaves us with more questions. And Locke goes on to say that, they continue to talk, and Jack says, well, what if I find my rabbit? What if he catches his rabbit? And, Locke is like, well, you're meant to deal with it. And I think that it's a really nice way of examining what Jack is going through. And then, of course, his line is a leader cannot lead until he knows where he's going, which I think is just fabulous writing.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's I one of the things that I noticed about Lost is how pertinent it can be to the audience as well, because I mean that's part of the journey is that we're there with the other survivors. And we're learning right along with them. We're also lost right along with them as well. And so if we can learn something along the way that we can take and apply to our own lives. And I think this
Yeah.
episode is really one for that. Um, and of course, we know, as you said in your plot synopsis, that Jack does find the cave after he has another hallucination. What's interesting about this one, he didn't necessarily see his dad, but what he heard. He heard
Yeah.
the ice, the glass, and he heard the little tinkling, like just like in the first flashback. And no, second one, I guess. Second flashback when
Yeah.
the with his dad. And he goes, and it's like his dad's led him to water. Um,
Yeah.
and
I
let him,
really was wondering about that. Like,
yeah,
was it part of Jack's need to help everyone else, his dad's or the figment of his imagination or whatever you want to call it? It's almost like he was leading him to water.
yeah. That's what I kind of took. Like it's almost like his body. It, I was really expecting his body to still be in the coffin, so that was a surprise when it wasn't. Um, so that means is his dad, well, he's an hallucination, but is he also maybe kind of a ghost or a some sort of spiritual guide to Jack when he needs him most? And
Yeah,
maybe,
having the body not be there
yeah,
leads to so many more questions.
yeah. But yeah, it's nice that he finds the cave. He finds some dolls. Dolls are always so creepy. Oh, why the dolls? But the dolls are there. And he has the water. He's able to kind of resolve an issue for the entire island. And he also gets his bearings because kind of as Sawyer said in the prior episode, I believe, where he said, well, this is not civilization. You have to think differently now. Um, that those words from Sawyer come back and make a reappearance and are echoed in Jack, returning to the group and saying, no, we need to band together. If we're going to survive, we can't exist that it's every man for himself or every woman for herself. That they're just not going to work. They do have to come together.
Yeah, and mentioning Sawyer, this episode reminds me how much I disliked Sawyer when I first watched the show. Um, through however many episodes, I disliked Sawyer. Um, the interaction with Shannon, um,
Oh,
it,
yes.
where she's asking for bug spray, and you know, he asks for money whenever they get off the island, and he says, he knows she would be good, paused for it.
Yeah.
And like, oh, dude, like,
Talk about a
and she
bag.
rightfully like throws it back in his face, like, and doesn't want to like
Yeah.
take something from him because he's being such
He's
an
such a
ass. I mean, it's the best.
Yeah. And scuzzy,
Yeah.
capitalizing on the situation because let's let's face it, Sawyer does what he has to in order to survive. He's got some street smarts about him. He obviously there's something more about him, but he's probably had some rough patches And so he's learned how to survive in kind of the more real world, um, which is kind of interesting because if you juxtapose that with Locke, who says he's just a meat and potatoes guy, and is just a real guy, we know for a fact now that he isn't. He's a data analyst. How many people are data analysts? He plays, you know, uh, role-playing game, with I think it's Risk. Maybe it's something a bit more than Risk, but his girlfriend is a sex worker, telephone uh sex worker, whatever you call them. And you know, Sawyer's the real meat and potatoes and knows, what he's got to do. I really thought the other thing that I took from that I hadn't really noticed before, Sawyer's really good about giving people nicknames. So,
Oh,
Kate
yeah.
is Freckles. Shannon is Sticks because of her legs. And of course, the cinematography really emphasizes her legs in that scene because she walks up to him and it's from behind. And so
Yeah.
you see her legs. She has nice legs. Um, and of course he's admiring the legs and, is going to get something, for this, barter system that he's got going. Hurley, he calls Lardo. He also called him something else that I don't recall. He even called
Yeah.
he even calls Saeed some sort of nasty nickname, I think. Um
I think he's
is
given him
one
a
of them,
few names
but
too.
hmm,
I think he's given him few names too. I think he's called him the Arab,
yeah,
maybe the terrorist.
yeah. And there's I think another one. Um I don't know if he's given Jack is Doc, but it's just kind of interesting that Sawyer's the one that kind of like compartmentalizes people into a name, you know,
Yeah.
which is kind of interesting, and I think it shows his maybe lack of respect, or at least our perceived lack of respect, the fact that he's basically commodified everybody. Um, Everything's about resources and materialism. So even though he says that he's thinking outside from a civilized um, you know, type of point of view, it's just kind of interesting that he's still very capitalist.
And when Saeed and Kate uh find him, find him with his stash because they think he's the one that stole the water, Kate initially tackles him and then he flips her over where he's on top. And he's like, "Oh, that's better now." And it's like, dude, like, uh, that- that's so bad. Like,
It
and
is.
and it makes him it's hard to like wanna even think about liking him. He can be funny, but stuff like that is just like, oh, how do you recover from being such a I don't even know what the right word is. Oh, dingus. I don't know. He's
And
he 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 takes a lot to get used to.
yeah, and what's interesting too is, I mean, Josh Holloway, who plays Sawyer, is a very attractive man. And, he's kind of got he's got the dimples. He's got sort of the rough boy next door type of thing. And there's obviously sparks that fly between him and Kate. Um, so she's gonna have to mediate some of that, because obviously maybe there's not a big line between, what could happen between them when she's really, I kind of feel like he represents the bad guy that she'd probably typically go after, maybe. And Jack the Doc is who she'd want to actually go after. So it's kind of
I can
interesting. A
see
lot
that,
of
yeah.
lot of subtleties. Um, I thought it was so interesting at the very end when Sawyer goes up to Boone and he's like, "Yeah, how does it feel?" And he's like, "What?" Boone's like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Yeah, to be on top of the most hated list." And Boone just gives him a look, and Sawyer responds, "Suck, done it." And I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, that said a lot too, because, even though Sawyer is just doing, I don't want to say just doing, but even though Sawyer is doing the things that he needs to do to survive, he has shown glimpses of him being more of a humanitarian,
Like he
like
doesn't
his
feel
help.
comfortable doing it. Like I think we talked about last week. He doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily know how to do the good things, but he still has shown that he will do them.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and I felt bad for Boone, because he was trying to do a good thing. Like he tries to do good deeds. Like he's trying to save Rose in the first episode, but he's doing it wrong.
Yeah.
He tries to share the candy bar with Shannon. He gets rebuffed. He tries to do these different things to be helpful. Um, but it's like it just doesn't work. And I
Yeah.
thought it was interesting that I almost felt like his blow up towards Jack was more of a frustration about himself not being able to be the hero that he wants to be. And not
Yeah.
like he's trying to control everybody else, but he's like, I can feel with him. You try to do something well, or you try to do something good, and it does not come out like you want it to.
Yeah.
And so I really felt for Boone. Um, and he does lash out at Jack, um, and says, who made you the hero?
Yeah.
And I think that spoke volumes too with Boone's own, there's frustrations for him and him finding where he kind of fits kind of in the hierarchy on the island. Because I feel like
Yeah.
all these episodes are helping us to understand where's each person gonna kind of fall, where's their strengths, where's their weaknesses.
And
Uh,
John even touches on that when he's talking to Kate and Saeed about where Jack is and,
yeah,
how they're going to deal with the water situation. And they're like, the camp needs you two. Like, I'll
yeah,
go find Jack, but the camp needs you guys to figure this out. And I thought that was kind of uh interesting to hear that perspective from the character on the island, like
mhm,
where they're actually realizing, okay, we see that hierarchy too, that people are looking to certain individuals for that leadership role. So that's, yeah, it is really starting to pan out. So with, so your most interesting scene is the conversation between Jack and John in the jungle.
yeah.
Um,
What about you?
um, I was debating between that one and the opening sequence. Um, and I think it's hard to go against the one-on-one with John and Jack.
Mhm.
Um, just because you get a greater sense of who both of them are. I mean, Jack thinks he's going crazy. John is trying to redirect him to see it plainly, like, hey, it's stress. But if you don't feel that way, maybe it isn't that way. Maybe you are seeing him.
Yeah.
So you're totally right. The writing on this show and this episode specifically in the scene like that is so good. Um, so I'm waffling so much because there are other few scenes that stand out. So I'll go out of left field. I'll say something completely different. There's a scene that stands out to me just because it kind of shows the sincerity between two characters, and that's the scene between Charlie and Claire
Mm-hmm.
when, they haven't found the water yet. He rounds up like a small thermos hand, like top full of water, and they're just talking, and it's a conversation where I think he calls Locke an old geezer, and do we feel safe with him traipsing through the jungle? And he makes her laugh, and she thanks him. I think it's the same, or maybe I'm thinking of the conversation they have where she thanks him for treating her normal
That's the one.
and looking her in the face and not just looking at her looming doom of the pregnancy. Um, and he
Wasn't
says
that
that,
interesting how, sorry to interrupt, how
no,
she really feels that she feels that others are scared of her because of the fact that she's pregnant and that she perceives that they're scared of her when they're probably really more worried about her and the fact that she is going to deliver this baby. One hopes that they'll be rescued prior to then. But if not, they have to have some sort of contingency plan of delivering a baby when they don't really have a whole lot of stuff. But
trying to remember what she calls it, like everyone thinks like she's this
a time
monstrous
bomb waiting to
burden.
go off. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, so that scene and like where admits that, he's not afraid of her. And I don't
Mhm.
know, there's just a sense of like normality there and a connection between the two that is nice to see. Um, because there is so much like chaotic uncertainty. Um, like the scene with Jack racing through the jungle, like the background's all like shimmering and cameras are spinning back and forth, and like he seems so frenzied. But to have the like calm moment between them two, and there's a few others like Kate talking to Jack at the end. Um, they kind of really help at least calm me down after the hype up of all those scenes. And again, I still think you're right. This is a tamer episode, but this still has some moments where it's just like it moments of feeling pretty intense with the
Yeah.
ocean scene and him like frenetically running through the jungle. But yeah, I think that I'll go with Charlie and Claire's conversation.
Yeah.
So,
I like that one between them because you can definitely, again, you see some chemistry starting to develop there, some real caring between the two of them. Where if they were in the real world, if they're back in Sydney, would Charlie have even given her a second glance? Or would Claire have given him an opportunity into her world? You know,
yeah,
uh, and I didn't mention it in our last episode, so I'll mention it here because it does come up at the beginning where Jack didn't know who the woman was that's out in the water, and we don't either.
yeah,
And then we find out her name is Joanna. She was supposed to go scuba diving. Something happened. They basically, said, nope, you can't go. You're going to have to wait a couple of days. I think she had like an ear infection or something.
yeah,
And so it's so amazing to me that you could be in kind of a small, kind of contained area, but you have almost 50 people, and yet you could not know everybody yet, on
yeah,
page 6. And the fact that I had to kind of think, because every time that comes up, it's almost a little jarring to me that they don't still know each other's names.
yeah,
Um, and I'm like, well, that probably is kind of realistic, but it does kind of jar you out and think, oh, she doesn't know, Jack's name, or she doesn't know, somebody's name. Oh, I think maybe it was Hurley or something. I don't know, but it's just kind of interesting that they're still really getting to know each other, and that it is only day 6, and it feels like at least 60.
Weeks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
weeks upon weeks, and then to find out, no, this is really only day 6. They're still getting to know each other. So,
And on top of that, not knowing who this character is, never seeing their face, I in this rewatch, I actually caught myself paying attention at the end when Jack's speaking and everyone has like the torches and you see the light of I actually saw myself paying attention to, okay, who are these characters that we've never seen before, like behind so and so? And it made me think, okay, like it's I think the drowning is such an awful reality
mhm.
that it makes everyone kind of pay attention to everything. That they don't know everyone. They ran out of food. They almost ran out of water. Um, and it's such a dire circumstance to be in. Um, and Jack's kind of speech at the end just kind of, I think, puts them in a perspective of seeing like, okay, we can't just be doing our own thing. We just can't, not that the woman who died was just like lollygagging and going for a swim, but like
Yeah.
they have to be careful with regular day activities because it could be the last thing that they do. Um, so is there a character, we talked about most interesting or favorite scene. Is there a character you find the most interesting in this episode?
Oh, that is so hard because I do feel like we get a lot of Jack development, and what he is going through. But I also really felt like there was some very interesting and good insight into Locke's character that made him very interesting. Um, I really struggled with trying to find kind of one. And I'm just kind of scrolling through my notes real quick to take another look. Um, I think I'd have to go with Jack because I think I learned, important life lessons from him.
Yeah,
You know, we don't get to pick our families, right? So, we all have to deal with some sort of amount of dysfunction in our own families, either from our parents or from ourselves growing up and, finding our ways and stuff. But I really appreciated that he didn't really lose that childhood spirit to want to help others.
yeah,
He kind of stayed true to his core beliefs, which I admire. Um, and while it's hard to like self-diagnose, you do at times need to reach out to others for help. And the fact that he was able to do that with Locke, um, and to come to terms with death, because I think there was, you know, he lack of sleep, dehydration, the stress of the plane crash, the stress of the marshal dying, and then the woman drowning, and having to save people.
yeah,
Um, and then at the same time, underneath all this, having to deal with his father's death and all the memories and all the things that come up associated when somebody dies. And, you hope that you can find comfort in memories. And it sounds like it was hard for him to find the good, warm, and fuzzy feelings,
Yeah.
and memories. Um, and I can relate to that. I can relate to that. And so I think I would have to say it was Jack, ultimately for me. I think he spoke the most to me.
And you really get to, with the flashbacks and present day, like you get to see like his emotions unfold, dealing with, searching for his dad, then discovering he's dead, you know, searching for him on the island, as a figment of his imagination. Um, and like when you brought up I think you brought up the conversation he had with the airline about trying to get his dad's
Yeah,
body on the plane.
yeah,
And he goes through this big thing. And at the end, he just says, I need this to be over, or I need to be done to bury my father. And
yeah.
it's almost as if like he can't move on until it's done and he just needs it to be done. And so the fact that he's still trying to be done with it because he's chasing the quote unquote white rabbit, um, which I was wondering how many episodes had he been seeing the figure, the man in the suit and the white sneakers? Was that episode two or three? I can't
I,
remember,
I,
but
I thought it was just the last one,
was just the
episode
last one?
4.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that I was debating between Jack, John, and his dad. Um, I'm gonna go, even though he's a vile character, like the worst introduction ever, I'm gonna go with Jack's dad
Yeah.
because it says a lot about who he is, the dad, by the way he treats his son. And it also speaks volume to what kind of person Jack is to kind of will do what he can despite those misgivings. Like when John's talking to him in the forest,
Mm-hmm.
he says he can't lead. Because he doesn't have what it takes, and he's gonna let people down, or he's gonna fail, but he's like reiterating the
Yeah.
words that his dad spoke to him as a boy. Um, and that's soul crushing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's odd to pick the bad character, but I feel like it left such a resounding mark on who Jack is. And then like the title of the episode, White Rabbit. So his dad is literally the White Rabbit. Um, and we talked about this offline, but every time I think of White Rabbit, I think of the first Matrix movie where Neo is on the computer and Peter tells him to follow the White Rabbit, and then someone knocks on his door, and then he's not going to go out partying with this group of people until he sees this girl have a white rabbit on her shoulder, and it's like so every time I hear White Rabbit, I think of that scene. Um, because Neo is chasing the White Rabbit and Jack is chasing the White Rabbit. So his dad is, obviously had some type of issues. Like when Jack discovered his hotel room in Australia, there were
Yeah.
prescription bottles full of pills. There were
Mm-hmm.
whiskey bottle, I think, in the
Oh yeah, there's
dresser
bottles thrown
drawer.
around and yeah. And then he finds his wallet and I'm like, "Oh, that's not good if his wallet's still in the room, you know."
And the scenes before we know it is Jack's dad, this scene, the one where he's talking with Kate and you see him just at the barely in the water where the water's maybe up to his shins. But it's this
Mm-hmm.
guy just in a suit and water coming up to his shins or maybe his knees. And it's such I don't know, it's a fascinating screenshot. Um,
It
and to
is.
see that. and know that no
Mhm.
one else is seeing what Jack is seeing is um what ultimately leads him to go through the jungle. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack with this episode between what Jack is dealing with, what his dad put him through. And then I think his mom even says that he can't turn away from going to get his dad from Australia, not after what he did.
Yeah,
Well,
what's
what did
that
Jack
about?
do?
Yeah,
Like, so that, you know, uh, the brain starts spinning. Okay, well, what happened between Jack and his dad to make
yeah,
his mom say that? So,
yeah.
um,
And
yeah, this is a
his mom
very
doesn't
hard episode
seem
to
like
watch.
his mom is very driven too, which is interesting. Jack is the product of two very driven, strong people, uh, which is also, looking forward to learning more about, like the mom, even, you know, who is she, because she obviously has a driving force of Jack's as well. Um,
And the scene with the mom where the dad has done some bad things with in Jack's life, but the
mhm,
mom also tries to brush it aside and say, you don't know the pressures your father is under. So she's almost like defending him for his
mhm,
bad behavior when that's another thing to unpack.
yeah,
It is a lot.
yeah, yeah, it is. I just feel it's such an amazing episode, and all that they really try to address in it. And again, just that it was kind of quiet, but it was still tense and um, learning some and not so much of other things. And, I just find it interesting how um, who they're going to focus in on. Because,
Yeah.
having been in a couple of, you know, shows as an extra, okay? So now, thinking more technical, um, it's hard to leave that behind when I'm watching certain things. And so I find it interesting that we don't always get all the characters in front of the screen all of the time. Or
Yeah.
we might just have, a couple of brief scenes. Like we see Hurley a couple of times, we see Saeed. Kate's not even in this a lot either.
Yeah.
Um, so I do kind of just on a more technical, like, what is everybody else doing? Are they
Yeah.
off doing other projects, and things like that. But that's the whole behind the scenes. But finding the balance so that you intertwine and tell all these stories. One of the scenes that stood out for me, especially when we got to the end and Jack does his big monologue about that they all have to work together, kind of echoed back to Jun and Sun, where Jun shows that, he's worried about Sun, that she's not getting enough water, which kind of, leads to him trading the fish with Sawyer to get some water for his wife. Um, but she's also, that's kind of an interesting exchange because she wonders when somebody's going to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
Also, very subtly saying, well, where's our leader? Where, who's going to be leading this show, type of thing. And she's also feeling like desperate or resigned to thinking that she doesn't know that anyone is going to come and save them.
And she
Uh,
wants to be a part of the group and not just be them
yeah,
isolated. Yeah.
yeah, and she suggests um, trying harder to communicate with the rest of the survivors, but June wants to stay apart from them. So I definitely, I feel like that's foreshadowing. They're going to have some issues there because he's a very strong individual and she seems to be meek, submissive, kind of does what, he wants, but there's also kind of that underlining sense that there's more to her than what we're getting at the moment.
Right.
So I really thought that was an interesting exchange. And again, a little brief, but kernels for things to come. So I really like how the writers were able to do that. And just through different characters make that decision. Well, we've got, I think our next episode is actually going to be focused in on Soon, or June. I'm not sure which. So, that's kind of a nice kernel that's going to be leading into some of their story.
And even at the end, she thanks him for getting her water, and his response is something like, "That's what husbands do," or "That's what good husbands do," or something like that. So,
Yeah.
um, they definitely have a dynamic that seems like, you know, follow his lead or follow his path. But you're right. She does seem desperate to kind of like, hey, we need to see the bigger picture. We need to be part of the bigger group. Um,
Yeah. She really has a lot of
um,
strength that hasn't been tapped yet. And she's got the wherewithal to see that they need to do this. And I mean, June does too. He goes out, he fishes, so he's able to do certain things too, to bring to the group. Um, so yeah, it's again harkens back to, if they're not pulling together, they're going to die alone. And so, yeah.
and another scene that is just like a little tidbit that gives
Hmm.
us a little bit more about the character when at the end, she brings Jack the water and she asks where he was. And he just says, I just had some things to work out. And she kind of smiles and says, "That's all I'm going to get, huh?" And it's almost as if
Yeah.
she's saying that because that's how she would respond. Like
Hmm.
she wouldn't share a lot of info. And that's when he tells her that her dad died in Australia.
Yeah.
And so it's a very somber scene. Um, and I also want to add that they do a great job with the music. Um, when he finds the cave, um, I made a note. He something about the music in the cave um,
Hmm.
gets amplified. Um,
Doesn't it echo or something kind of within the cave or something?
so in the cave, there's almost like this. There's like two different musics being played. One is kind of like haunting sounding, and
Mhm.
one's like a little sad, but it's kind of subdued, like really subdued. The sad. I'll describe it as sounding sad. And then when he has that conversation with Kate, all you hear it is the sad music, and
Mhm.
it's the volume is a little higher. It's so for me so touching, um,
Mhm.
because it just adds another layer to an already great show. Um, yeah, I don't know if you've thought anything about the music at all, but
Some
that
of it,
really,
yeah, the ambient music is interesting. It really, the show seems to be pretty minimalist in its music approach, except there's where it's very deliberate, like that one. But I should have had my headphones on. That probably would have helped if when I'm watching the show and I didn't. So I probably missed some of those cues. I pick up more on the ones where they have deliberate, like pop music or more popular music. Then I know, okay, they are very, very deliberate about there's something about that song that's important. So it
yeah.
for me, it perks me up because then I'm like, okay, well, is it the title of the song? Is there something, lyrically? which we have when Hurley's playing the song on his Walkman. And we get the lyrics that I know, there's a lot of trouble, but I'm not today, type
Yeah.
of thing. So those I pick up a bit more because the ambient music is really does kind of flow. And again, it's kind of like addressing, it's meant to kind of heighten the emotion, but not necessarily draw attention to it, where I think a lot of those musical cues work in the show because there's not a lot of them. And I was really surprised that there's when we were talking offline about how often a popular song comes up in the show. And there's in a few episodes in season one, but there's not like a lot, you know.
Yeah.
Um, and when it does come up, it's related to something I believe that would create that song. So like Hurley's Walkman, Ray's radio in the truck is playing
Yeah.
Pat's line and things like that. So I'll be curious to see if that continues, that's how we're going to get the music. Because obviously, eventually they're not going to have batteries unless they figure out how to repower the batteries, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, how do they continue except through, I guess, flashbacks, you know?
Yeah. Well, we do three questions here. One is what is the most interesting scene?
Mhm.
Two would be what is the most interesting character, and three, we focus on the episode. And you kind of touched on this question earlier, but I want to get your perspective.
Mhm.
Um, the the advice John gives to Jack, giving him direction. I was thinking, does that almost cast him as, even if unlikely, an unspoken leader? I know you said that and I agree, he's probably more likely to want to do things his own ways and let other people lead the way. So is there anyone else that you think kind of helps to fill that role or could fill that role as leader, other than what we've seen with Jack?
Yeah. Interestingly, I think Saeed or Kate could be good leaders. Um, but for various reasons, they haven't become leaders themselves, but they kind of, this is going to be the wrong word, but lash out, or they'll have instances where they'll actually speak up and, do something that leads the group, like Saeed. Um, he in the prior episode says, we've got to organize.
Yeah,
Somebody's got to work on the water. I mean, we had that happen. Somebody's got to work on the water, somebody's got to work on food, somebody else needs to collect wood and, yada, yada, yada. Um, I didn't see any of that really come to fruition. And I noticed that, with this episode, everybody, where's Jack? Where's Jack? Where's Jack?
yeah,
you know, Even Claire, where's Jack? Everybody's seeing Jack as the natural leader, which is interesting that even though we have other good leader candidates, like in
yeah,
Kate and in Saeed, and we've even seen Saeed really kind of preempt what Jack will eventually say.
yeah.
But it's Jack's words that come across and people kind of take to heart. Um, but I think, yeah, it would have been interesting if you'd had what would the dynamic have been if it had been like Saeed or if it had been Kate? What would that have been like? Or Locke even, if he was the leader, how would that have been?
And it makes me wonder if, like, because Saeed seems completely capable.
Mhm.
And it almost makes me wonder if, like, being on the beach with them, seeing the animosity with him and Sawyer making accusations, if that kind of like uh and unfairly kind of rules him out from being, I guess, the overall leader because you have such a negative
That's actually a good
backlash.
observation. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, Saeed does have a couple of fights, with Sawyer that would make him appear to be a bit more scrappy rather than a natural leader, somebody that you would want to follow. Even though the sentiment of many of the survivors that we've seen so far is that Sawyer is a dick. So, naturally they
True.
kind of side with Saeed. Um,
Yeah.
and his abilities. Yeah, he's totally capable, but yeah, one does kind of wonder. And with Kate, only Hurley and Jack know about her prior life before the island. But for whatever reason, she also is not a leader. But she does show leadership qualities to others in smaller groups. And I
Yeah.
think maybe that's the deal is that in a smaller setting, there are those individuals that can rise to the occasion and can have the confidence to be a leader, or because of the dynamics of the people around them, they accept them as their leader.
Yeah.
And I think we see that in our lives as well. Like, I don't think I'm a natural leader, but when I'm in my work element where I'm project managing something, people believe and trust my abilities to lead a project, for instance.
Yeah.
And in that kind of case, yes, I have leadership capabilities, but I think it's more on a small scale, rather than, you know, an island scale, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it is interesting to see when I think of that conversation between John and Jack,
Mhm.
I could see John as a leader, but I think you're right with like him wanting to kind of redirect and make sure he's okay so he can lead. So it's almost like he recognizes that the people see and want Jack as a leader, and John's just like, all right, how do I get Jack back on path?
Yeah.
Um, so it's interesting how we get these like little snapshots in these scenes that kind of help form a bigger picture. And again, that's the writing, the cinematography, everything just wrapped together, just really pulls the show together. And again, I totally spaced on this episode. Man, it is powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, just amazing. And you know, I know they keep it up through the first season, so I'll be curious when we get into subsequent seasons and how well it does. And the writing. I think what I find fascinating with this show too is the fact that you have different writers that come on board. The pilot was written by two groups. I think there was a group that wrote the story, and then another group that wrote the teleplay or the script. And then you've had like guest writers on, and you would have no idea because it feels really seamless. So even
Yeah,
like all that going on in the background, and I think there are different directors for each episode as well, or at least it round robin or however they did it back then. But um, you're really getting the seamless foundation behind it so that the stars and the story can really be the focus of the audience and have that seamless immersion into the 40 plus minute episode that we get to
yeah,
see.
yeah. And I'm already ready for the next episode. Um, so we've touched on our three questions. Do you have any other notes or anything you want to add about the episode before we
You know,
sign off?
let's see. Let me just peruse through here real quickly.
I I did find myself having more and more notes as we get further into the series. Um, and I will say I do like that Jack even defends Boone at the end. Like
He
like
does. I really
even
felt
though
that.
Boone stole the water, he was trying to find a way to make a good decision, even if he didn't do it the right way. And
Yep.
Jack still, even though Boone blew up on him, he's willing to like try to look past that and see the bigger picture.
Yeah, and I think that again, that's another quality of a strong leader. And maybe why Saeed, who, isn't quite the leader because he might hold grudges where and we don't know that for sure. I mean, as more episodes unfold, we'll find out more about Saeed and everybody else. But yeah, we kind of hit a real tense moment there, kind of a Lord of the Flies. I thought Boone was going to get, really, tarred and feathered out of the group there for a minute. But
Yeah.
you're right. He was just trying to do a good thing. And again, feeling bad for Boone because he was trying to do a good deed. And unfortunately, everybody's like all over him and kind of pushes him back down,
Is
so
Boone kind of like Wile E. Coyote, where his plans just go to shit? Like he just he can't get anything right, even though he's trying to do something good.
yeah, yeah. I'm kind of thinking that there are just certain people in life that no matter, and we all know them, right? We have that person in our lives that, man, no matter what they do, just bad luck rubs is always right behind them, or that cloud that
Yeah.
rain on their parade is right there to do it. Yeah, and I think maybe Boone is it may be that character. We're gonna have to revisit that down the road, I'm sure, as we get more into learning about Boone and Shannon and everyone else that we haven't gotten to see yet. Um, but yeah, as always, leaving our hour, however long we discuss here, anxious to talk about the next episode, episode 6. So do hope that all of you will like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and of course, put comments down in the box below. Remember the spoilers. Um, but yeah, look forward to next week's conversation.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for going along with us on Ride the Stream, and definitely look forward to next week.